Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome to Policy and Rights, the show about government policy and human rights. Welcome back to Policy and Rights here on Depictions Media Radio. Well, we're hearing rumors and rumblings that, of course, China and Russia, we already knew that they were friendly, and they seem to be strengthening their relationship together. Bad thing, maybe not such a bad thing, but it is definitely a thing. It is something that... How are they going to come together? What is some of the agendas and work that Russia and China are going to want to do together? It needs to be looked at, and as global powers like the United States and Canada need to examine how that is going to position the world stage for those two countries. What is going to happen to commerce, and what about the sanctions that were placed against Russia, embargoing them from being able to sell certain goods on the world field? What about sanctions in the tech industry that have been placed against China via Huawei for lifting of that particular technology and wanting to strike future deals with countries like Iran, which also has sanctions against it. These are the things that need to be looked at very closely.
This had all the pomp and circumstance of a presidential inauguration. The big red carpet walk up, their aides lined up on either side. Two men bent on restructuring the world order and strengthening their ties.
在双方共同努力下，中俄关系始终保持蓬勃、健康、稳定的发展势头。两国政治互信、利益交融、民心相通，不断深化。
For Vladimir Putin especially, this visit matters. He wants to project an image of grandeur, of one great power with another, never mind sanctions or war crimes indictments. And he needs China's support, politically and crucially economically. As for Ukraine, he suggested it was the West stymieing prospects for peace, with a special mention for plans outlined this week by the UK to supply Kyiv with shells containing depleted uranium.
Похоже, что Запад действительно решил воевать с Россией до последнего украинца уже не на словах, а на деле. Но хотел бы в этой связи отметить, что если все это будет происходить, то соответствующим образом Россия вынуждена будет реагировать, имея в виду, что коллективный Запад начинает применять уже оружие с ядерным компонентом.
Present at today's meetings, Russia's key man on military technical cooperation and the defense minister, but nothing concrete on NATO concerns that China might lend military support to.
We haven't seen any proof that China is delivering lethal weapons to Russia. But we have seen some signs that this has been a request from Russia, and that this is an issue that is considered in Beijing by the Chinese authorities.
If President Xi was considering it, he certainly wasn't telling. China already provides Russia with an economic lifeline. Adding military aid to the mix would hardly fit with President Xi's peacemaking credentials, or with the narrative that he shares with Russia that it is the flow of Western weapons that are fueling this conflict. Sanctions have made Russia heavily dependent on China. Energy flows are going east at discounted prices, and the deal signed today suggests a lot of other things will be too. President Xi has little to lose and much to gain by sticking with the status quo. Diana Magnay, Sky News, Moscow.
Let's talk about the main part of our show, and it deals with food and water. Of course, there always seems to be a shortage of food or water, but there are other reports saying that, hey, there's plenty of food and water to go around. It's how it's being distributed is what the problem really is. And we're going to hear some reports on that maybe in certain areas that nature is just simply isn't providing the water that should be there, and it's being over distributed. We're going to hear about how there's some good news in ensuring that children have enough food in order for them to go to school and actually learn, because there's a direct connection, and we're going to hear this in one of the segments. There's a direct connection between food, water, and learning. When a child shows up to school with that has had a meal or normal meals, a normal water supply, and of course the appropriate medical attentions for children, that their brains absorb knowledge. Now, some of us are saying, "Oh, well, they're going to school anyway. They'll eventually learn something." That may or may not be true, but the important thing to remember here is no matter where that child is in the world, that child represents the future of the human race. And we should all be looking to protect that future so that we all, as a race, as a species, continue to evolve and continue to develop. So, why don't we move forward into into today's show, and let's listen to, as the first report is from the World Food Program, and that person is in Rome, in appearing into the New York press conference. And the water segment is going to be in the UN New York Press Center, and speaking to reporters about how water is actually distributed and how water can be used as weapons and why it should not be used as a weapon, and that we should come up with agreements, not just simply negotiations, but agreements about how water should be used to help people live better.
All right, good afternoon. A couple of programming notes. Today, we will start with our guest, the World Food Programme's Director of School Feeding, Carmen Burbano. She's joining us virtually from Rome to talk about the launch of WFP's State of School Feeding Report. Then, as soon as I'm finished with my briefing, you will hear from Richard Connor, the Editor-in-Chief of the UN World Water Development Report of the UN Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization known as UNESCO, who will brief you on this year's report entitled Partnerships and Cooperation for Water. First off, let's go to Carmen Burbano. Carmen, are you online?
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Hi, welcome to the noon briefing.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to make this briefing. We're very happy today. The World Food Program launched just half an hour ago our new State of School Feeding Worldwide report, which comes out every 2 years. And as the name of the report indicates, it's essentially a status update of where we are, mainly about the well-being of children all around the world. And the report this year is particularly important because it is providing information of what happened to school children since the COVID pandemic. You may recall that during the pandemic, school closures affected about 90% of the world's children and left 370 million children without school meals. In many cases, the only meal that they receive a day. That's what happened in 2020 and 2021, and it was even a concern in 2022. But in the meantime as well, the food crisis compounded the effects on children. We know, for example, that out of the 345 million people facing crisis level of hunger, 153 million of them are children. So one of the things that was very much part of the backdrop of this report was that children are facing a disproportionate effect of the crises that are affecting the world right now. And we wanted to understand how our government's responding to this. So we have good news and we have bad news in the report, but the good news is spectacular. So I think that is one of the things that we're highlighting today. Governments worldwide seem to be increasingly recognizing that the health and nutrition of children is something that needs to and must be protected, even in the context of fiscal crises that are affecting the world and particularly low-income countries. So one of the things that the report is announcing is that at the moment, 418 million school children are receiving meals around the world. This is up from 388 million children before the pandemic. So one of the things that we're announcing in the report is that the effects of the school closures and the restoration of these programs seem to, by and large, have been restored and have been, access to meals has been restored to children. Now, the other big piece of the news is that governments are investing somewhere close to $48 billion in school meals programs, particularly this issue of providing health and nutrition to children in schools. 99% of that investment is domestic. The big piece headline, one of the headlines of the report is that there has been a $5 billion increase over the last 2 years in government investment in the health and nutrition of school children. If we zoom in on low-income countries, there we also have good news that they have increased their investment and are currently investing around $400 million of their domestic budgets into these programs that support the health and nutrition of children in schools. The other big piece of the news is that if we even zoom in further on Africa, which is very much a continent that's always on our radar, we also have good news. 66 million children in the continent are being reached by school meals programs, 84% of that with domestic funding from African governments. So one of the big findings of the report is that the rally of governments, this domestic mobilization, is unprecedented. And it is really the result of the School Meals Coalition, which was launched in the Food Systems Summit in 2021 at the level of heads of state. There are now more than 76 heads of state that have joined this global movement on behalf of children, and it is their commitments, it is their mobilization that has achieved this unprecedented results. Now, the other side of the coin is that there's also bad news. And the bad news is that this progress isn't equally distributed across the world. In the lowest income countries, coverage of these programs is the lowest. In low-income countries, coverage is only 18% compared to about 60% in high-income countries. So, you know, if you're a child that is born in a country like Niger or like Somalia or like Haiti, you have the double whammy of going to school in sub-funded education systems, but also understanding that you're probably going there on an empty stomach. You're probably sick, you're probably hungry. And then we wonder why children are not learning in these countries. We know that in low-income countries, more than 70% of children under the age of 10 cannot read or write a simple sentence. And part of this is because they really don't have enough to eat, and they're sitting in these classrooms hungry and without the proper support. So this is definitely on our radar as one of the big pieces that we have to look at. The other piece of news is that while even low-income countries under excruciating circumstances have increased their financial commitments to children in schools, donors have stepped back. There is a 6% decrease in donor funding for these programs in low-income countries, and this is really disappointing because countries are putting their money on the table and donors should be meeting them halfway. These are programs that are prioritized by governments, and instead of stepping in, they are stepping back. So we need to reverse this trend. I'll finally end with a few words of why these programs are important. The report is presenting the latest evidence that these programs are important, not just because they fill bellies, they make sure that children are not coming to school on an empty stomach amid a food crisis that is depleting food resources around the world, but also they are bringing children to school, particularly girls. They're helping them learn. We have robust evidence now on learning outcomes. Really importantly, they provide markets for smallholder farmers, strengthen the entire value chain, and can transform food systems across the world. The report is announcing that 4 million jobs were created worldwide, most of them for women, that work in school meals programs, particularly in the preparation of food. So good news in the report, of course, but also bad news that seems to be the agenda moving forward. We are particularly concerned, and on our radar we have countries like Somalia, like Niger, like South Sudan, like the Democratic Republic of Congo, that have very, very low levels of coverage and that really need the rallying of the international community to ramp up their support to children. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. I'll now turn the floor over to questions from the press. Yes, Edie.
Thank you very much on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association for doing this briefing. My name is Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. It's always positive to see an increase in the number of children getting school meals, but is there an estimate of how many children that really need school meals are not getting school meals? I didn't hear that figure.
Thank you so much for the question. We are estimating at the moment that about 73 million children living in low-income countries in extreme poverty with high levels of malnutrition do not have access to these programs at the moment. So that is the most important and the pressing gap that is included in the report and where we think the international community needs to concentrate its efforts.
Okay, James?
My name is James Martone. You mentioned Africa and specifically Somalia, Sudan, and Niger, and you spoke about how difficult it is to reach children in those countries. And especially in light of this WHO and UNICEF report that came out specifically on Somalia yesterday about how many thousands, tens of thousands of people might have died due to drought, half of those children under 5. Does that put a special emphasis on what you're doing to focus more on a country like Somalia, where there's statistics now saying that thousands of children possibly are dying of hunger?
Yes, absolutely. We have a special spotlight on the Horn of Africa, particularly parts of Kenya and Somalia. This is the most important safety net reaching children in these countries. Households basically count on the meals that children receive in schools as part of the daily requirements of children as they come to school. So the absence of these programs also hit the entire family, not just the child itself. For us, Somalia, for example, is a particular red flag because in a country that is hit by several different crises at once, this is a country where we do not have enough funding and we have had to cut back on part of our school meals operation and coverage there. So that's why in this particular country, we are particularly concerned about the levels of funding, but also the levels of coverage of the program.
Yeah. Yes, please.
The School Meals Coalition of which you spoke, and Somalia is a member. Does that, countries that are not members, are they then not receiving meals if they're not a member of this School Meals Coalition?
No, the countries that the countries that are part of the School Meals Coalition, basically what that means is that at the level of head of state or at the ministerial level, there has been a special commitment from the government to prioritize this issue and prioritize childhood and childhood support. Now, that does not mean that countries that have not joined the coalition do not get support. In many of these countries, these programs are ongoing. What we are doing at the moment is outreach to the countries that have not joined to make sure that there is that level of political commitment. So these are two, I would say, concurrent efforts that we're making, both arriving at children specifically and also tackling their particular leaders to make sure that they're on board.
So I'm going to just go through a briefing before we get to the next guest, Richard Connor of UNESCO, who will speak a little after 12:30. First off, I have a trip to announce. Tomorrow, the Secretary General will head to Brussels to attend a session with the members of the European Council, which will include a working lunch. Among the topics to be discussed are Ukraine, climate change, and Agenda 2030 and its sustainable development goals, notably the global economic and financial situation, as well as reform of the international financial architecture. The Secretary General will return to New York on Thursday. Turning to Afghanistan. In a tweet, the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan noted that as the new Afghan school year starts this week, more than 1 million Afghan girls will be barred from attending classes. UNAMA reiterated its call to de facto authorities to reverse all discriminatory policies against women and girls. The UN mission in Afghanistan said that these policies not only impede the aspirations of half of the population, but are causing great damage to Afghanistan. In a statement, the UN Children's Fund's Executive Director, Catherine Russell, stressed that girls and adolescents, including those with disabilities, have the right to an education. She warned that preventing girls from learning will also have far-reaching consequences for the country's economy and health system. On Syria, the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Martin Griffiths, is in Damascus today, where he met with President Bashar al-Assad and Foreign Minister Faisal Maqdad. Mr. Griffiths emphasized the need for continued expanded humanitarian access and scaled-up aid operations to address the growing needs throughout Syria, where the impact of the February 6th earthquakes has worsened the already dire humanitarian situation. Earlier today, Mr. Griffiths was in Jordan, where he met with Foreign Minister Ayman Safadi to discuss the current humanitarian and refugee situation in the region. Tomorrow, Mr. Griffiths will continue his visit to Syria, where he will meet with national and international NGOs. This is Mr. Griffiths' second trip to the region following the February earthquakes. He visited Ankara, Gaziantep, Aleppo, and Damascus last month. In Turkey, we, along with our partners, are reaching 25 million people every day with hot meals, as we continue to support the government-led response to last month's earthquakes. Nearly 623,000 people have received water, sanitation, and hygiene support. We and our partners continue to provide emergency aid, including more than 46,000 tents and hundreds of thousands of tarpaulins, blankets, bed sheets, mattresses, cooking equipment, and hygiene kits. Meanwhile, the deadly flash floods that hit southern Turkey could heighten the risk of disease outbreaks in temporary settlements. Our flash appeal for Turkey is less than 19% funded. Turning to Ukraine, our humanitarian colleagues are again sounding the alarm about the heavy toll the escalation of hostilities in the Donetsk region is taking on civilians, particularly in the areas of Avdiivka and Bakhmut. The frontline town of Avdiivka has been under constant bombardment in recent days. Ukrainian authorities are calling on the 2,000 people who remain there to urgently leave to safer areas. Our humanitarian colleagues note that the situation has drastically worsened over the past months. Most of the 32,000 civilians who used to live there before February 2022 have already fled. Those who remain are facing shelling that is reportedly destroying houses, hospitals, and schools. The town has no adequate access to water, electricity, and gas supplies, with health services having been decimated, markets disrupted, and access for aid workers and even volunteers being extremely challenging. In Bakhmut, fighting has also intensified over the past few days. The town had already been under constant bombardment since mid-February. Most of the 3,000 civilians who remain in the town reportedly spend their time in basements with almost no access to central services. They have limited supplies of food or hygiene items, according to humanitarian organizations. There's no piped water or electricity, and schools, hospitals, and markets are non-functional, leaving the people remaining in the town, including around 30 children, dependent on aid to survive. Tomorrow afternoon, the UN and the African Union will hold a joint high-level meeting on financing for the African Union Transition Mission in Somalia, or ATMIS, and resourcing for the Somali security transition. The meeting will begin at 3:30 p.m. in the ECOSOC chamber. The African Union Transition Mission in Somalia supports the implementation of the Somali Transition Plan, which foresees the handover of security responsibilities to the Somali security forces by the 31st of December 2024. However, financing for the transition mission and resourcing for the security transition continues to be a significant challenge. A sustainable and predictable funding mechanism for ATMIS is a critical element for successful security transition. The high-level event will be co-chaired by the African Union Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security, Bankole Adeoye, and the Undersecretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, Rosemary DiCarlo. Mr. Hussein Sheikh Ali, the National Security Advisor of the Federal Government of Somalia, will also participate in the event. We have an update from our peacekeeping colleagues in the Central African Republic, where a joint operation with the country's internal security forces led to the arrest of Hussein Dambusha, regional commander of the armed group FPRC and member of the CPC. This happened on Saturday, about 300 kilometers north of Bria in the Haut-Koto prefecture. The detainee is named in reports of the group of experts on the Central African Republic as a perpetrator of human rights and international humanitarian law violations. He is currently in the custody of Central African authorities following his transfer to the capital Bangui with the support of the peacekeeping mission. In a statement, MINUSCA reiterated its continued support to the Central African judicial authorities in the fight against impunity. Turning to Mozambique, our colleagues there tell us that the number of people impacted by Tropical Cyclone Freddy has risen to more than 886,000. They're very concerned about the spread of cholera and other waterborne diseases, particularly in the city of Quelimane, where the water supply has been disrupted. We and our humanitarian partners in Mozambique will be appealing for more funding to reach people in need. In addition, our colleagues tell us that more than 1,000 schools have also been damaged, and UNICEF is supporting government efforts to provide school kits and temporary learning spaces. Today, we mark a few international days. In his remarks to the General Assembly event marking the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination a short while ago, the Secretary General said that racial discrimination is a deeply damaging and pervasive abuse of human rights and human dignity that affects every country. He underscored that we must take action to address racism wherever and whenever it arises, including through legal channels. Today is also World Down Syndrome Day, World Poetry Day, and the International Day of Forests. And today is the International Day of Nowruz. In his message, the Secretary General said that as we celebrate Nowruz, let us choose hope and compassion, embrace the opportunities that lie ahead, and work together to build a more peaceful, more sustainable, and more inclusive world for all. And I'd also like to point out in terms of briefings that tomorrow is World Water Day. At 3 p.m., there will be a hybrid briefing here entitled Turning the Tide, a Call to Collective Action by the Global Commission on the Economics of Water. And today, I would like to basically give the first question to anyone who's being admitted into the New York Journalism Hall of Fame. Anyone? Oh, I think we have someone. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. It's a great honor for me and a great honor for the Associated Press. I will be their first correspondent admitted to the Hall of Fame, so it's doubly amazing. A question about a press conference that was just held in Moscow. Russia's President Vladimir Putin said that China's proposals can be a basis for settling the war with Ukraine. This was at a press conference with China's President Xi Jinping. Does the Secretary General have any reaction to that?
Well, it's too soon for us to evaluate. We would need more details on the proposals in the first place. But of course, we encourage all efforts made by all countries to do what they can to resolve this conflict through dialogue. And if there is a pathway to peace involving any of these countries, we encourage them to proceed with their efforts.
And one follow-up on your announcement of the Secretary General's trip to Europe. We note from the Russian announcement that the Black Sea Grain Initiative has only been extended for 60 days. Does the Secretary General have any plans to hold any meetings or do anything to try and lengthen that time frame?
Well, I would just refer back to the note that we put out over the weekend on the extension. Obviously, we're aware of what the respective countries are saying on this, but we are doing what we can to discuss with the parties their own concerns, and we'll see how satisfactorily their issues and their particular concerns about the implementation, not just of the Black Sea Grain Initiative, but of the separate deal regarding Russian exports, can be accommodated, and hopefully that will ensure that the continuation of this deal is fairly smooth and straightforward.
You didn't answer my question, though. Is this an issue that the Secretary General plans to raise or discuss during his trip to Europe?
Well, he's certainly discussing the situation in Ukraine. And in terms of the particulars, I won't go into that at this stage. But our efforts, including the efforts of Rebecca Greenspan, the Secretary General of UNCTAD, to deal with the situation of Russian exports are continuing, and we're doing what we can to make sure that all parties continue to be satisfied with the implementation of the agreements. Yes, Deji.
Something wrong with the mic again. Okay, so my question's on Ukraine. Today, there's report that the UK wants to supply Ukraine with armory with depleted uranium, which we know that in Yugoslavia crisis, it caused many people suffering still now. Any response from the UN about their decision to send these kind of armory to Ukraine?
Well, you'll have seen the concerns we've expressed over the years about any use of depleted uranium, given the consequences of such usage, and those would apply to anyone who provides such armaments.
So UN does not support the decision by the UK government to supply depleted uranium?
Well, I'm not aware of the details of this, but we have made clear, including through our Office of Disarmament Affairs, concerns about any use of depleted uranium anywhere.
And a follow-up with Edie's question, when you said the UN would support any efforts to bring peace to Ukraine, yesterday when you answered me, you said that truce or peace plan should be in line with the UN Charter and the related General Assembly resolution. It seems it's difficult to get both. Because if you got a truce, you have to demand the Russian Federation immediately cease its use of force and to withdraw of its military from the territory of Ukraine with its internationally recognized borders. Would that be difficult?
I'm not going to get into an analysis of what a peace process will take. Every peace process is unique. They take their own dynamics.
That's in line with the resolution.
Yes. It's very clear what the General Assembly resolution states. It's very clear what the UN Charter says. And so we want any peace that results to be in line with those. How those issues can be dealt with, like I said, it's different, every dynamic, but ultimately with the right political will, there are always ways of achieving things diplomatically, and that is achievable. We have to get to the stage where the necessary political will is there, however. Now let me get to the next guest. Thanks very much.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you for joining this press conference to launch the World Water Development Report. This report comes just ahead of the UN Water Conference, which, as you know, kicks off here tomorrow for the next 3 days. The report is embargoed until tomorrow. And here today with us to introduce the report are Johannes Kuhlmann, the Vice Chair of UN Water and Scientific Advisor to the President of the General Assembly, and Richard Connor, the Editor-in-Chief of the World Water Development Report 2023. And I would like to first invite Johannes Kuhlmann to give us a few introductory remarks, and then Rick Connor will go into the findings and details of the report. Please, over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And thank you for being here on a day and on a topic that, of course, will get a lot of traction tomorrow and in the coming days. I think water is an extremely important interconnector for sustainable development. We can discuss that a little later, and certainly Rick will show why partnerships and cooperation, which is our report's headline this year, is such an important catalyzer or condition for sustainable development that is water, climate, and people smart, and ecosystem smart, if you want. So our report is published annually. This is our 10th topical report in UN Water. The World Water Development Report is the UN's flagship report on water that we issue every year. And we have been doing that for a while now. We had 4 very big, comprehensive reports, and then changed the way we issued the report into yearly reports on a topic. And so this year's topic is these partnerships and the cooperation we need. And why do we need partnerships and cooperation? We have a global water cycle. So people have no issue to acknowledge that the air that we breathe in New York is not the property of the United States. But the rain that is above New York is also not, and the rain is also not the property of the United States. But as soon as water gets on the ground, all of a sudden it's a commodity and it's a property. So we need cooperation and partnerships to address water issues. We see that all over the place where we cooperate on water in partnerships, in solidarity. We can leverage additional benefits. We can leverage them for water management, for food, for energy, and for climate change mitigation and adaptation. So cooperation is really the heart of sustainable development in the water perspective. We also need that because the global trade is connected through water. So we are trading 1,500 square kilometers of water every year. My home country is Germany. If you would pour that effect, this virtual water, on my home country, you would have a 4-meter high every year water all over the country. So that's the impact that connects us. So water is a connector. People don't see it, but it connects us in an immensely powerful way, and that's why we need these partnerships. We are building them throughout the water conference. We have the SDG 17, which is on partnerships, and our report is structured in a way where we address regional issues every year. We also go into some very prominent topics that cover by and large the interactive dialogues that you can follow in the next days of our water conference. And because we have the global acceleration framework for SDG 6 implementation in the UN, we always address in our reports the 5 major catalyzers for making SDG 6 a reality, which is governance, finance, education, data and information, and innovation. So those are our 5 big ticket items, how we actually try to get the SDG 6 into a zone where we feel more confident about being able to deliver for the people. So now with that, I'd like to give the floor back to you.
And I give the floor right away to Rick
Okay,
to walk
thanks.
us through the findings of the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you, Ioannis. That was a perfect and ideal introduction. Now, the report is pretty big. We've got a lot of things to say, and I'm going to try to bring it down in 6 minutes. So I'm obviously not going to cover everything. So I'll get straight to it. Yes, the report is on building partnerships and enhancing cooperation. And these are essential to realizing the human rights to water and to accelerating progress towards each of the targets of SDG 6. So global water use increases roughly 1% per year. But they say although this is a global value, the actual increase in demand is happening in developing countries and emerging economies, where it is driven by industrial growth and particularly rapidly increasing urban populations, so rapidly growing cities. So providing the water and sanitation services to these increasing, because population growth is essentially urban. So it's in these areas that you're having a real big increase in demand. 10% of the global population currently lives in areas that are high or critical water stress. In our report, we said that up to 3.5 billion people live under conditions of water stress at least 1 month a year. I was just browsing through the IPCC report from yesterday, and so I updated the slide. They say that roughly half the world's population is currently lives under severe water stress at least one, for a certain period in the year. And as a result of climate change, seasonal water scarcity will increase, both in regions where it's currently abundant, but also in regions where it's already scarce. So partnerships and cooperation, as Ioannis mentioned, they take place in just about every single water-related endeavor. If you look at human settlements, most partnerships have to do with water supply and sanitation services. And it's been shown that effective stakeholder on-the-ground involvement leads to services that are more appropriate to the needs of more appropriate to the needs and resources of poor communities. And these partnerships also increase public acceptance and ownership of these systems. If you look at rural or peri-urban areas, smallholder farmers work together to improve their systems through shared irrigation systems. So that's
really nice to her.
Hello. Nice to meet you. So you've got this idea, you've got these different partnerships. Some are in rural areas, some are in cities. Now, what happens is nearly 1/3 of the world's cities that are dependent on surface water as their primary source are facing competition with agriculture. Ironically, this is the same water required to grow the food to feed the cities in the first place. So urban water demand is projected to increase by 80% between now and 2050. And global urban population facing water scarcity is projected to double during the same time. which is right now the global urban population facing water scarcity is about 1 billion people, 1 billion, so it should be around 2 billion by 2050. So cooperation between cities and the surrounding agricultural communities will be absolutely essential to meeting the water needs of both. And this cooperation involves a combination of market, administrative, and especially participatory mechanisms. But for instance, by investing in agricultural communities upstream, farmers can afford that, they can afford measures that increase irrigation efficiency, and the municipalities benefit from additional water released by farmers. Then you throw in the environment. So, and in the report, the partnerships focused on watershed protection or rehabilitation have been increasing worldwide. Something called water funds are financing schemes that bring together downstream users like cities, businesses, and utilities, and to collectively invest in upstream habitat protection and agricultural land management to improve water availability and water quality. While the report makes a solid case for the need for partnerships when it comes to water, we also try to highlight a number of additional opportunities, co-benefits, that would motivate partners to engage in more collaborative approaches. For example, the report shows how involving a diversity of partners actually expands co-benefits and improves performance. Environmental co-benefits, biodiversity, flood and pollution control, are among the most often highlighted in the report, along with data and information sharing and co-financing. Partnerships can foster innovation. During the COVID-19 epidemic, partnerships between health authorities and municipal wastewater laboratories were able to track the disease, providing unprecedented georeferenced outbreak information in real time. The estimated cost of meeting SDG 6 is somewhere between 600 billion and a trillion. This is a very, very rough estimate. The idea is simply to get an idea of the order of magnitude. Partnerships create opportunities to pool often limited resources and share risks, thus improving the business case for investors and financiers. And financiers themselves can benefit from cooperation through co-financing arrangements. I would just like to, and I prepared this morning because it fits in with the report, and I wanted to connect it with the IPCC report. Don't worry if you can't read what's on the slide. The point is, there's a need for greater cooperation between the water and the climate change communities in order to better understand and ultimately implement both adaptation and mitigation measures through water. Now, mitigation opportunities, reduction of greenhouse gases, range from biogas recovery from wastewater treatment systems to wetland protection. And these deserve greater attention from climate planners and they should open the door to further collaboration with water stakeholders. And more importantly, increase access to financing for water through various climate funds. Most of the climate funds have been earmarked to mitigation, so energy, transportation sector to reduce greenhouse gases. But there are things we can do in terms of water management. The examples I gave were protecting the biosphere, protecting wetlands, and wastewater treatment plants. So for the water sector to be able to meet this 1 trillion or whatever it is, we need to get the financing from somewhere, and we need to increase the use of water funds that are available for mitigation. And so I noticed here, see, you've got reducing methane from wastewater. That's where the arrow is. There is a significant reduction in greenhouse gases that can be done, but it's not getting through. In part because of the climate change, the climate change community is recognizing it, but the water community is not tapping into those resources, and that's something that hopefully will be discussed and during this conference, and maybe come out with something better. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much to both of our speakers, and the floor is now open for questions and answers. And if you would identify yourself, please. Edie.
Thank you very much for giving this press conference on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association. Welcome, and wish you success in the conference. Two questions. First, I think a lot of us are wondering exactly what is going to come out of this conference. On Friday, what's going to be improved or better for the world's water experts, drinkers, etc. And secondly, you mentioned the fact that the estimated cost of achieving SDG 6 on water is between $600 billion and $1 trillion. What kind of financial figure are you at the moment? So, you know, how far away are you financially from achieving that? Thank you.
I can go first, and then you can maybe amend. So, on your second question first, maybe there is no one water fund or something. We have the SDG fund in the UN, and we have several funding mechanisms, and I think some people say we need to up our investments by 4 times to be able to meet the SDG 6 target. I also know that the government investment in sustainable water infrastructures at the moment globally is around $3.2 trillion. So it's 3 times the money we would need. And that investment has a collateral damage in terms of destroying ecosystem services at the value of $1 trillion. So what we absolutely need to do is we need to invest our money smart, climate, water smart, and people smart, because if we just increase the funding, we will also just very much quicker increase the damage we do through this funding. Our current investment schemes into infrastructure, into systems that we need to give the people water and to feed the people are not sustainable per se. So it is not so much a question about just throwing more money at the same problem. It is much more a question of investing that money smart and wisely. So yes, we need more attention to that, but half of it, I think, can be done through just investing the money that we are investing now in a smarter way. So it is not a question about how many $1 trillion do we need. It is a question about an investment culture. And do we have an economic sector and a financial and political sector will to make investments that are good not only to produce X amount of water physically, but also for the environment, for the climate, and for the people, because it's a big social issue as well, this water supply. So I don't really answer your question. I notice you want a figure, but I think maybe Rick can talk a bit more in detail about figures. Generally, we need a different culture, how we evaluate and valuate water, not only as an economic commodity, but also as the social and environmental good it is. And I tried to explain a little bit earlier that the global water cycle is a global common good. We just don't want to understand it because we believe water belongs to us, but nobody has a problem to say the ocean is a global public good or the air. But the water cycle is the same. It connects, it goes. We can stop it in a dam for a year or 2. We can use it, but it will eventually come back to the global water cycle. So we need to invest with that in our minds. And here I come to the outcomes of the conference. I think this conference is really important to sharpen a couple of these foundational awarenesses that you need to transform our water action agenda that we will have from the conference. So there will be lots of commitments, but we need to make sure that these commitments transform the way we invest in water, we capacitate people, and we need some game changers, as the SG and the President of the General Assembly put that, and I think they will speak about these game changers, of course, in their communications, in the opening and closing sections of the conference, and the members, of course, will discuss these game changers. What are the big ticket items that we need to get right to make sure we will have more sustainable development impact generally from the water sector? So there will be a presidential summary of the conference where these main game changers or these big ticket items will be summarized and published. This as a mandate goes to the HLPF, and I am pretty sure that the members in New York will look at that very closely and seriously, because they are thinking now as we speak before the conference about what is the implementation and accounting mechanism for doing things differently. We can talk a lot about transformation, but we also need to measure and account for transformation. So that's going to be hopefully discussed and put in place as soon as possible, but that is a member-driven process. That's not on UN Water to say it, this is the best solution.
I could just quickly add with respect to the funding aspect. As I mentioned, it's extremely difficult to come up with this value of 600 to $1 trillion. When you talk about just water and sanitation, the global annual expenditure is somewhere around 300 to 500 billion. But the targets of SDG 6 include things like transboundary water management, integrated watershed management, capacity building, which are extremely difficult to put a number on. So, but I would like to build on what Johannes was saying about smart investment. Indeed, gray infrastructure or human-built infrastructure is extremely expensive. It has environmental impacts. It also has social impacts if you have communities that are displaced because of the building of the dam and the reservoir. And working with nature, and that's what I was alluding to with the water funds, it brings in the concept of nature-based solutions. Now, wetlands if you protect wetlands in the upland, wetlands act as a sponge, so they actually retain water. So they help they help solve the storage issue. They purify water, so they help with the water quality issue. And at the same time, when you have a higher water quality downstream, you save a lot of money in terms of the necessary treatment for it. Now, we did a little bit of a study, an analysis 4 or 5 years ago, and we determined that less than 5% of the investment, and possibly less than 1% of the total investment in water, that's water, not just supply sanitation, but overall water resources management, less than 5% goes to green infrastructure. We're not saying necessarily that you need to balance it 50-50, but clearly 5% of investment in nature, in green infrastructure, is clearly not enough. So getting back to what Johannes was saying, find a way to balance. It's, yes, we need more money, just like any other issue, but we do need to invest much more wisely.
Thank you, Pamela Falk, and then we come to others. And I think I should say that Johannes Kalman has to leave us in about 5 minutes. Is that right? But if there are any further 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Okay. But if there are any further specific questions, of course, we'll be happy to direct them to you. Pamela, please.
Thank you so much, and thank you both for the briefing. It's Pamela Falk from CBS News. So quick follow-ups on a few things. One was what you were saying is there's going to be a president's summary, not an outcome document that people have to sign on to?
It's not that people have to sign on to it, it's that we will hear all the member states and the stakeholders and the private sector people who are accredited to speak during this conference and to discuss. And what we want to do is we want to really foster a spirit. Water negotiation is the traditional thing, but we should not negotiate water. We should deliberate on water, because as soon as you start with a negotiation process, you have opposite positions and battles, and you want to take more than the other and stuff like that. So that's the stuff of yesterday. We don't need that anymore. So we are hoping that during the conference, the participants will deliberate those water solutions that we need for transformation. I am confident that they will do that, because I hear that on the floors already today, so they have started to discuss that. And what we will do in this summer is we will try to pick up from all the deliberations those main items. They will be put into the summary, and this is what we will report to the HLPF, and this is also what will form a part of what the member states will start discussing whenever they want to discuss it after the conferences. What is now this accounting, and what is the implementation mechanism we need for this?
All right, very helpful. And you said, now this is a very technical report and we're trying to get through it. I am trying to get through it. But you said the growing world water shortage is doubling or something, more or less. What would you characterize as the real principal reason or reasons for that? I mean, I assume you're talking about potable water, but is it climate? Is it dirty water? Is it lack of resources, conflict? I mean, what do you attribute it to? And then the European Union just put in its priorities for this conference, this summit, trans-border cooperation. So what does that mean? Thank you.
Okay, good questions. The first, the numbers I gave had to do with a doubling of the urban population experiencing water scarcity. And that is, or the population, maybe the proper term should be exposed to water scarcity. And water scarcity is defined as availability versus demand or versus use. So if you get to a certain point where, say, 75% of your available water is being used, you're at a critical level because you only have a 25% less as a buffer. And where water scarcity truly will affect us is throughout all of the main uses. So agriculture uses 70% of all water globally, okay? But agriculture is becoming increasingly efficient where they can afford to do so. And that is irrigation efficiency, basically going from pivot irrigation to drip irrigation. So you can grow just about the same amount of crops with roughly a third of the water. And the idea is to balance, to meet the needs of growing cities. You have to increase your irrigation efficiency, and that allows water to be available for cities. So to answer your question about what is causing this scarcity? Of course, population growth, but very much shifting dietary patterns. So if you're going from a diet that is increasing in meat, for instance, meat requires a lot more water than growing wheat. So as developing countries emerge, the dietary and basically consumption patterns, if you will, because of course, whether it's more washing machines, dishwashers, things like this, they're all much more water intensive than what you'd have traditionally. So so our habits combined with population growth is what is driving demand. Also, just to meet the SDGs themselves on water supply and sanitation, if you've got right now 3.6 billion people do not have access to safe sanitation. Unfortunately, sanitation is right now the way we do it, it's extremely water intensive. It doesn't consume that much water, but it does use it. And if you don't have the treatment after use, then you're polluting the environment. I skipped this part because there's so much in the report, but if you go to water pollution, the biggest problem in developing countries, the biggest source of pollution is untreated wastewater. Globally, 80% of wastewater is released to the environment without any treatment. And in many developing countries, it's pretty much 99%. And treating wastewater is expensive. In developed countries, the number one cause of water pollution is agricultural runoff, because again, you're not if you're using pivot irrigation, there's a lot more runoff, and that runoff contains the fertilizers, the herbicides, pesticides, etc., that pollute water. So that's what's causing the. You've got the increasing demand. You've got increasing pollution if you're not paying attention. And then you've got climate change. In climate change, the biggest thing is, it's not so much dry, well, it is dry places getting drier, but it's this seasonal variability. Rivers, in the U.S., the Colorado River, for instance, it's over allocated. So historically, they had a certain amount, you calculate a certain volume of water on average that you would expect to have running through your river. Turns out year after year, that average was wrong, so they over allocated it. Now, this was done, in the 30s, 40s. In the developing countries, we're still trying to figure out what the amount of water that is truly available and what can be allocated. And so, and this is increasingly difficult to determine water availability because of the seasonal variability in precipitation. In other words, it's getting more, the uncertainties are increasing due to climate change, which increases risks. So to answer your question, the scarcity is a balance of difficult to assess availability versus very critical increases in demand.
Thank you. One question here, then there.
Thanks. Amélie Bottelier from AFP News Agency. I have two questions. First, one practical one. I'm just a bit confused because the report is supposed to be under embargo until tonight, but this press conference is live on UNTV, so you're giving information on the report which is embargoed. So can we use that before the embargo?
Well, we will hope that the embargo is still being observed for the report. So the embargo is until tomorrow.
It's live on the website. This press conference is live on the website.
With the notion that that the report is under embargo.
Okay.
Right,
well, then my real question then. Would you consider that we are already in a global water crisis, considering all the description that you made, or that it's just imminent and that we could avert it if we do something about it? Thank you.
Thanks. Excellent question. It's almost a matter of perception who you talk to. Certainly, there are several local, regional water crises. That's clear. Now, to say that it is a global water crisis, is it the sum of the parts that make it a global crisis? Because there are some places that it is, that water is not a critical issue. I think when you talk about the global water crisis, it's primarily a lack of services So a lack of drinking, safe drinking water to 2 billion, so that's 25% of the population, and a lack of sanitation. That's my opinion. Others would like to say that there is a crisis and it needs to be solved. If that is what it takes to get because if we don't address it, there definitely will be a global crisis. I think this conference is calling very much for the urgency to act. But like a lot of crises, I mean, it's not affecting, the problems with water are not affecting rich nations and rich communities the same way it's affecting poor communities. So from a poverty point of view, clearly we have a global water crisis.
Sorry, so just a follow-up on the figures that you mentioned earlier, the 600 billion to 1 trillion to attain the SDG 6. Is it per year or is it
by year?
It
yes.
is by year.
Annually, yes.
Yes, please.
James Bays, Al Jazeera. You put up the map, and we saw lots of red on it.
Yep.
So just help us when we're going to be listening to all these speakers from the countries concerned. Where are even choose me a country, where is the most water-stressed, water-scarcest place where they have the biggest problem on Earth out of the 193 member states?
Yeah, certainly northern India and throughout the Middle East. Basically, it's where you have if you have a combination of low water availability, so desert areas, and a high level of population. That's where you will have the biggest problems. It's funny that, and then if you notice the middle of Africa there, it doesn't seem to be, it's low to medium. But yet, that's where most people don't have access to water supply and sanitation. In that case, it is not physical water scarcity that we're talking about. It's economic water scarcity. The water is there, but there's not enough investment to get it from the rivers or the groundwater into pipes and treat it into people's homes. And that is just as much the concept of economic water scarcity it affects people's lives just as much as the physical water scarcity. But we don't seem to talk about economic water scarcity as much as we should. So to answer your question, if the physical water scarcity, you can define it clearly in these areas that are red on the map. But you cannot forget economic water scarcity, which is people that simply cannot afford it, or the governments are not providing it for whether it's economic or other reasons.
Thank you. Last question there.
Stefano Vaccara, La Voce, New York. And my interest is on the strategic value, if you want, weapon. The water has been used for centuries, but lately it looks like, well, I don't know if you know, but there is a famous book that won a Pulitzer Prize by Daniel Yergin, The Prize, that was about energy, oil. And it had maps and things where we say, like, all the wars that happened in the last 2 centuries happened really, on the hand was the quest for energy, maybe also this one on Ukraine, who knows. But the future, there are somebody that says, actually it's water. There will be water, the scarcity of water, and the region that you, for example, mentioned, Middle East, and other, the next wars and the next conflicts are really for the control of waters. So my question is, in this conference, how these issues of the danger, the scarcity of water and price for next conflicts around the world, how is addressed, and if there is somebody thinking about maybe an international treaty to figure out how to stop to make water like the strategic weapons and something like the water cannot be used for for wars?
Excellent question. Yes, there are some people saying that the next wars are going to be over water, but right now that remains a matter of opinion. What this conference is, one of the things this conference focuses on, because it's one of the SDG's targets, is transboundary cooperation. So you would assume that wars over water would be between countries that are sharing a resource. And so strengthening transboundary cooperation would likely be the major tool to avoid conflicts and escalation. From the UNESCO side, we're very much for peace, and like I said, it's a question of opinion. But there's another opinion that water tends to lead to peace and cooperation more than it does on conflict. The current transboundary, and I think I have at the end, I had it just in case. There we go. So 153 countries share, nearly 300 transboundary rivers. Right now, if you look at the land area of shared basins that is under subject to an agreement, it's about just under, I think it's 58%, so just under 60%. That's not 60% of rivers, that's 60% of the land, because that's the way it's being measured. So there's a long way to go for to establish the additional 40%, so that all transboundary river basins are covered under the agreement. Now, what often happens is it's not just an agreement on water. Often there's also an agreement on energy, because when they enter an agreement, it's not just about allocating water. It's also, usually there's a dam or two involved from which they produce hydroelectricity. And so there's an agreement about sharing the hydroelectricity as well. And in these cases, even if there are other types of tensions between the neighboring countries, they could be through tensions over trade, tensions over human displacement, and things like that, they tend not to touch or disrupt the agreements over water and over energy. And so, in fact, that these agreements tend to be a source of diplomacy. There's something to build upon, building from the water and energy, and from there you can talk about trade, because the link between energy and trade is a lot clearer than the link between water. But unfortunately, that's another thing that we're going to try to show that water security completely underlines economic security. So these transboundary agreements can act as a basis for diplomacy into wider realms, rather than instead of the opposite, that they would be a source of conflict. That's my personal view, but again, there's others that think that are completely convinced that the next wars will be over water. It's the future, it's conjecture, so nobody really knows, and anybody who thinks they say they know, I don't see why we could believe them. I personally am much more optimistic.
This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.